Well, hey everybody, it's your buddy Chris.
That's me.
And Nathan. Here we are. This is going to be the first in a series that we're doing. We're tackling this mother of God thing right here, the Ingmar Bergman Cinema. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about each one of Ingmar Bergman's films. Yeah, all 39 of this box set, which is going to be insane. So what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be doing it kind of in order, curated order of how Criterion has set this up. So we're going to be talking about how we have opening night all the way to closing night with all the centerpieces in the middle as we get throughout the year. And so what we decided to do is break this up into like 3 movies at a time. That way, because we want to talk about each one of these films, like we want to talk about each of them in depth.
Yep.
And hopefully you like what we're talking about here and enjoy the content of each of these movies. Obviously, we're not going to get too in-depth because some of them we like a little bit more than others. There's a couple today that we're going to be talking about that we're like not the biggest fans of, but we're really excited to talk about them regardless.
Yeah, this will be a great video if you are if you didn't pick it up yet and you kind of thinking, well, should I make the jump for it? Especially now with the Barnes & Noble sale ended, it's a little more steep. Maybe these videos will help you in deciding, is this something I want to really get into? We both went in head first with it, without a doubt.
I mean, it's a lovely box set, and I have the things in front of me. I have both the book, which has all the film essays with it, as well. We've been reading it as we've been watching the films as well.
Mine's at home.
And then we have right here the movies themselves, and we're just talking about these 2 first discs right here. We're talking about Smiles of a Summer Night from 1955. Then we're talking about Crisis, his first film in 1946, and then we're finally talking about A Ship to India in 1947. So let's actually just begin with Smiles of a Summer Night. This is the film that we both started the Bergman set with, right?
Yeah, no.
So what'd you think of it?
Blew me away. Like 100% blew me away. The premise gets you as soon as the film starts. Obviously it's in black and white. But yeah, you learn about the protagonist. He's I think he's a lawyer, I believe, and he's with this young woman, and you can obviously tell they're maybe not the best fit for each other.
No, they're definitely like a different, very he's a little more middle-aged, kind of near the end of his adulthood.
Yep.
Before into like maybe an elderly person, and then she's really young. So we actually have several notes because this movie is actually very complicated because
It is.
There's a lot
of Swedish.
Things.
It's Swedish.
First of all, it's Swedish.
But the main character is a lawyer. His name's Frederick, and he has a son who you get introduced to very quickly named Henrik. And you can tell there's already tension. Frederick is a lawyer who is very proud of himself and his accomplishments, while his son Henrik is I think he's studying to become a churchman.
Yeah.
And obviously his father is very disappointed and insults him in front of his young wife, very casually.
Yeah. And who's actually more near Henrik's age, actually. And Henrik is also like having a hard time because their maid, Petra, is just constantly flaunting herself in front of Henrik and but teasing him, but like not ever giving him anything because it's just making him sexually frustrated. Yeah. And so is Anne. She's sexually frustrated too.
Yeah, what I really already like about the movie is, well, it's 1955, and you got to think what was coming out at that time in America. Screwball comedies were obviously a big thing at that time, but they were very much more, they were more conservative. 40s and 50s were more conservative in terms of screwball comedies. And my friend Dana really pointed out, too, after he saw the movie, and I agree, this movie is a lot more openly sexual.
Oh, absolutely.
It's
more
jokes.
European, too.
Yeah, and it's jokes and comedy, and that's where that movie is striving at. But first, if you're watching, you think it's a little uncomfortable, like, oh, really? She's already very provocative and teasing him in that way. I'm not really used to this. But it's kind of funny if you just let yourself watch it as it's presented.
Yes, because Bergman, this is kind of near the beginning of his career, obviously, in 55. He's made several movies before this one, but he's wanting to do comedy here. And so this is like, we just introduced 4 of the characters. There's actually 4 more people to talk about, because not to really, I guess, I mean, we're going to tell you more or less the plot of the movie, But there's two other characters that in particular that one of them has an affair with one of Anne's friends. Mm-hmm. I have all these arrows here. Desiree, who is an old fling with Count Malcolm. And Count Malcolm actually has a wife named Charlotte, and Charlotte is wanting to get back with her husband, but her husband is in with
Desiree.
With Desiree.
And so is Frederick. He's with Desiree too.
Yes.
Desiree is a actress. She's a very famous actress. She's a little older now. Her beauty is fading, and she realizes it. But Frederick has moved on from her. They had a fling. They acknowledge it. But now Frederick is with Anne. He's convincing himself throughout the beginning of the movie. He's like, yeah, I love this young woman. But he's already conflicted in the very beginning of the show with Desiree. They go to see a show. Well, actually, there's a very funny scene where they're taking a nap, Anne and Frederick. And Frederick is already sleeping by the time Anne just wants to talk as soon as they lay down. And Frederick's already dreaming of Desiree. Yeah.
It's just, you can tell, it's kind of just like, well, we can tell that she is definitely unhappy with where her current situation is, and then dreaming of, the scenario of something that might come to pass. So it's really interesting how just all of these comedic things that are like definitely screwball-y, because, this is not really, it's like reality meets, that dramatization of what we all think it is, and it's very Shakespearean in the kind of Midsummer Night's Dream kind of bit.
I think if you don't open your mind to Bergman's comedy, which is interesting because when this movie came out, this was his first attempt at a comic movie, because he wasn't doing very well financially or commercially. I mean, there was a few, his early films were being praised, but they weren't making a splash. And he needed money, and they said, write a comedy for us. And he wrote this, and it did very well commercially and critically as well. So, you gotta just open, you gotta take it with the comedy, because, I mean, if you're not, open to the comedy, you're gonna think, well, Frederick is kind of like a piece of crap guy.
Yeah.
But in the comical sense, it's hilarious that he's already putting himself, this proud man of prestige, is putting himself in a predicament already. And it's on to nobody's fault but his own.
And there's several scenes that Cris and I both started quoting at each other, actually constantly, because there's two of them that are like inverses of the other. One of them is "Nobody touches my mistress."
No, you may take my. There's a famous scene where Malcolm realizes his wife is being poached, and he says to his wife. And his wife, Charlotte, knows about Desiree.
Yes.
Which is kind of sad.
Sad, but she wants him back, but, is accepting of her husband's flaws.
They jab at each other, and he says, someone's poaching is poaching Desiree. So he announces to her and everyone there, some man may come and take my wife, but if you come and attempt to take my mistress, I become a tiger. Rage as a tiger. Yeah. Which is like, oh, okay, that's a very funny thing to say to your wife.
And then later on, Frederick says the same thing, but the inverse way. Yep. Whereas, nobody touches my mistress.
But if you take my wife, I will have rage like a tiger.
Yeah, exactly. So these lines alone are just comical, and so that's what makes it so hilarious. Yeah. And then by the end of the film, we see kind of. Should we tell?
No, I don't think. I mean, it's not a huge spoiler. It's mostly about the predicament these characters are putting themselves in, and the very witty dialogue. And, for me, the most surprising ending is between the showdown between Count Malcolm and Frederick.
Yes.
Which we won't talk about, but I was very shocked to see that in this movie.
Yeah, it's one of the more serious tones of the film. It's still funny, but in a, especially the outcome of it, they all start, laughing about it, but the build up towards it is very intense, and so it was just one of those things that you didn't expect in this movie, and it definitely happened, and you see the results of it.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of been skipping around with the plot, but just to quickly write it down, there's 8 characters. There's Frederick, who's the main protagonist, I would say. They're all very important, but I would say Frederick is the most important because he's connected to everyone else.
Frederick,
with
married with Anne.
And then their son, Henrik.
Henrik, who wants Anne.
Yep, but is being not poached, but flirted with the maid Patricia. And then Petra. And then Anne's friend, Charlotte, who's married to Count Malcolm. And Count Malcolm and Frederick are linked together by the actress Desiree.
And the seventh person is actually the carriage driver.
Oh, the old man, yeah.
The old man who actually, which he ends up...
being a narrator, essentially.
He ends up being a narrator, and also, like, is the very, very end... He's like him and... I'll give this away, because it's not that big of a deal, but him and Desiree Petra end up together, and more or less just kind of recounts the whole entire event in a very symbolic and poetic way. And so it's really cool. Great film. I mean, it was definitely... Yeah,
I wrote on my letterbox a review on that film. That's a 5 out of 5. If you watch my YouTube channel, that's a hertastic review. A 5 out of 5 right there.
I'm not jonesing around about that.
Yeah, I mean, you just gotta...
Just throwing our little things out.
Woo! Let's see if they'll bite. But, no, go see Smiles of Summer Night. I think you can stream it, I think, on, like, Prime or something like that, or Vudu. It's not that expensive. I think it's, like, $2 or $3. And that's definitely worth the price for it.
Yes, so I think it was a very apt pick from Criterion to pick Smells of a Summer Night for the first film for this entire thing, because I think they don't want to start straight from, Crisis, his first film, because, that's kind of like a... We'll get to that in a second, but like kind of like a sour taste in people's mouths, at least from the very, very get-go. They want to, entice people with a really fun time, and you have a theme of opening night, which wants to set apart. It's got, all of the things that the Bergman, like the comedic parts to it, just the relationship part, which all of these films that we're going to talk about opening night are very involved with relationships. And so, I mean, that dynamic is what, that sets this movie apart.
I think this is a perfect entry for anyone who hasn't seen Bergman and wants to, because that's not his high, but that's like climbing to, like, if you like this, just wait,
Yeah, it'll get better.
But it's also a good set piece for, like, oh, you're interested in him, then see where he started off, and then there's more to come from there. And I really like that.
So yeah, we definitely both recommend Smiles of Summer Night. So I think we're going to end that particular note on a really, really high one, because this is just a really great movie to start with Criterion selection here. So thank you so much for checking out that one. So let's move on to our next. All right, moving from Smiles of a Summer Night, we have Bergman's first film in 1946, Crisis. So this movie starts off in a very interesting way, unlike any of the other films I've seen by Bergman. It has an overview narration. Yeah, and it's really kind of like a pan over of this small town on a lake. And I don't know who actually narrates it, but the man it feels like a storybook almost in a way. It's like in a small, quiet town where everyone minds their own business. There's a market street. There's a lake. It feels very like amateurish in a charming way. In a charming way. I was reading that how this narration is really interesting is it was helped, apparently I was reading in the nice supplement book right here, that Victor Stronstorm, I can't ever say his name correctly, he is the main character in Wild Strawberries, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but he is the director of The Phantom Carriage, but he came along to help Bergman a little bit and help him cut up with this movie. Now, he didn't obviously do much to it, but it's just really interesting how I haven't seen any other film like this where he, like you said, the narration comes first, and he's like, it's this nice little storybook. Yeah. So,
well, real quick thing about him, the Phantom Carriage, that was actually the film that influenced Ingmar Bergman to get into films. He said he just fell in love with that movie and the actor himself.
Yeah. And we'll definitely talk about him a lot more next video when we start talking about Wild Strawberries.
Let's talk about Crisis.
Crisis. So let's start with the story a little bit. So we have Nellie, who has just turned 18. She's been raised by her aunt. And
Idleberg. Is that how you pronounce it? Is it Idleberg? It's spelled very weird.
Engelberg?
Yeah.
Or something like that. But her mother comes to town after 18 years. So her mother, Jenny, comes to town after 18 years to, like, kind of introduce herself to her daughter.
Yeah, and you can tell by the foster mother's reaction that she does not trust her at all, because Jenny owns a salon in the city, and she has been through a lot, as you can tell, the way she presents herself. And Idleberg, which I believe is how you pronounce Nellie's foster mom.
Her
aunt or foster parent. She's a very simple woman, very kind too.
It's a very small town. That's the whole point of this movie, is this very small town.
Yeah, but what's great about her is she lives in this apartment complex where she has one man named Ulf living with her, basically almost rent-free, and she's giving piano lessons to the young kids, and then even the landlord lady, she's like, yeah, you need to get my rent, but then they make a joke, and then they start eating together, and she's like, hey, can you actually loan me money? Which is funny.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it was like, that was one of the funniest parts of the movie, was once she handed over money to that, and then like literally the next scene, aka it just kept panning over to another part. She had money to lend over to another person. It's just really, really funny.
Yeah, so like she's a very heartwarming woman, and Nellie has been a big part of her life, and she wants only the best for Nellie, and she knows she can't offer it for her, but she contests the intentions of her real mother's reason for visiting.
Yes, and her real mother is trying to get her out of this situation, trying to get her back to like the salon and like get her in the city.
Yeah. And
much to like Olaf's chagrin, who is this character who is there rent free, who's kind of suiting Nellie a little bit too, because he really likes her, but she is like kind of iffy about him, wants to get out of the city and like kind of explore her life.
Yeah, and that relationship for the movie is kind of interesting because it doesn't touch too much on it, but which is a flaw, but I'm not going to judge it. He's also a very much older man, but he's very more responsible and respectful, and I think that's why Idleberg wants Nellie to be with him. But yeah, later Jenny stays in town while there's a town like party, I believe, and Nellie's 18. And she really wants to go, but Ulf and Idleberg make a dress for her, which is a heartbreaking scene. They make a dress for her for the party.
Lovely scene.
And Nellie comes home with a new dress for the party
from Jenny, her mom, and it was one of those scenes that felt really kind of downtrodden a little bit.
A flash of brilliance for him for the future movies for him to come. Because it's a very subtle scene, no music, just panning between the two characters.
It happens really fast.
Yeah, and then moving on to the party.
And the party is where Jack comes.
Yes. Jack is Jenny's kind of like roommate, but also kind of like lover.
Yeah.
But Jack is not a good guy.
No, he's
almost like a facade character. He's really trying to act like this big tough guy in front of Jenny, but he's really just mooching off of her. And he's very rude to her, and he's actually a shorter man, too. And you're wondering, like, this guy's very damaged, but he's trying to make up for it in some way. And, Jenny goes like, oh, hey, I'm going to have my daughter come with me. And he says, and like, the scene made me roll my eyes. He goes like, that's about the most interesting thing you've ever said in, like, 2 years.
Yeah.
And Jenny doesn't mind that at all. And I'm like...
It's just interesting how Jack, more or less, gets entangled with Nellie.
Yeah. How does he...
And that's just very interesting because Nellie is, very young, and this is kind of a sexual awakening for her, and so she gets entangled with Jack, which is really interesting.
At the party.
At the party, and makes it very, as you can tell from that, what Chris has already said, it gets to some trouble, and it more or less wakens her up. Near the end of the movie, because she needs to, not be around Jack, who is a really flawed character, but sets his purpose.
Yeah, well, so, they run away together after the party, and Ulf finds them and is not happy with Jack, and especially Nellie. And Nellie's just like, I'm fed up with this...
small town.
This small town and, like, the valleys. I want to try something different. I'm 18, I'm gorgeous. Obviously, city men are finding me attractive. So she goes with Jenny, and then she finds out on the train to the city that Jack is actually with Jenny. And Jack plays it off like he was drunk and he didn't know anything. And they move to the city, and Jenny's actually happy at first. And Jack and her are trying to rekindle things in a way, but Jack keeps the whole Jenny thing secret. And then what I also like about the movie, it flashes between Nellie and the city, but then you just go back to the old small town and kind of see how things are there, which aren't very well. Well, they're fine, but
yeah,
things aren't going well.
It's kind of, it's interesting because the theme I feel like I got from this movie is small town theme to it. So that small town theme being, if you stay in a certain spot for so long, you more or less know everything and know everybody. But also at the same time, if you move out to the city, you can experience a lot of new life, but a lot of danger as well. Especially if you're naive, like Nellie, because obviously Ginny comes to take her daughter and forces her to confront adulthood, but in a really kind of jacked up way. And so you see that, and once we kind of get near the end of the movie, there's a tragic thing that happens at the very, very end, which is a very, as I was reading, a very French New Wave kind of homage to a lot of the things going on. And so it's an interesting film, I think, to me, because of that whole aspect of leaving a small town and experiencing, life as it comes. But I mean, obviously, that's the one small portrait we get because like we were talking about near the very, very beginning, it's a narrated story. So obviously the story continues, but in this particular film, we're just gonna get cap-ins of her experiences of I'm thinking about leaving. She comes back and be like, I don't think I should have left. Yeah, kind of a thing.
It's definitely the quintessential question of like small town versus big city. And honestly, I think Bergman makes a very sound case for you need to have a little bit of both. But yeah, the most important parts about this movie isn't really the story. Like I said, it's a little around the place. Like it's not very structured well.
It's his first film, so.
But like for a first film, it's very interesting to watch. But I think what he nails, and I think throughout most of the movies I've seen with him, he really knows how to captivate the audience with characters. Yes. They're character studies. They're almost like archetypes in a way. But they're very like conflicting characters. They're not just one-dimensional.
They're very flawed and.
Yeah, if anything, Jenny's the most one-dimensional. But Jack is such a rounded character, and they focus on him at really interesting points. Along with the foster mother, she is a very tender, heartfelt character that you just want to give out to. But yeah, there's some really great flashes of great. Filmmaking there, though. And
I know Bergman does not look kindly, as we were reading, he doesn't look kindly to this film as much.
Well, he's a perfectionist.
So. Sure. But like as he was saying, he kind of feels like this film was ripe with imperfections, obviously, and but as the author of the particular essay says, that all of great work, you can see flashes of brilliance throughout, as like Chris was saying, especially with the dress scene. Like there's flashes of brilliance in there that like really kind of just showcase that Bergman's going to be an amazing director future down the road, especially as he's dealing with all these characters. And as Chris was saying too, there's just a really, really tender moment of just keeping all these characters and having them be archetypes of sorts, but also having a lot of different dimensions. Yeah. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. This movie, I think, at its core, it's for the cinephile for Bergman. But I feel like everyone...
Don't need to see it. But...
Right. But I think it's an important movie to watch all around because it's his first film. You want to see where it started.
Yeah. So, that's what we got to say about Crisis. I think you should check that out. Yeah. So, we're now down finally to our last film, A Ship to India. Alright, so now we're moving from Crisis to A Ship to India, 1947. This is... Actually, there was a film in between, but I don't think it's in the Bergman box set itself. But we're talking about A Ship to India. It's got a couple of different names. A Ship Bound to India, A Ship to India, and the Bergman box set by Criterion is A Ship to India. So that's what we're going to call it. This movie is really interesting. Chris?
Yeah, it's actually like I think it's an adaptation of a play or a book.
I think it's a work already. I want to say it's a book.
I think it's a book, but it's not his original movie. Actually, A Ship to India, Bergman, I don't think he's really acknowledged this film, if I remember reading correctly. He really doesn't take much credit for it. I think he's more embarrassed of it, if anything.
He's embarrassed, especially during the premiere. I remember reading this, because the person who cut the film together, when it premiered, had two parts flipped over. The final act and the third act were flipped, and it was just it was one of the nights, I guess, he drank himself he doesn't remember the night.
Yeah.
That's how much he does not care about really this particular film.
But I will say, I actually really enjoy this movie. I understand it's flawed,
Yeah.
but I just really enjoy it because one, I mean, after you watch Crisis, A Ship to India is a little more finely tuned in terms of a story and the direction of it. But once again, it keeps very great character studies, and this one is more about two main characters.
Yeah, three, really.
Three, but
so,
the most interesting are the first two.
Sure. So the characters are Johannes,
Yep.
who is the son of a Navy man, Captain Blom. And Captain Blom is a father that he really detests. Mm-hmm. And they are both in the Navy, in the Swedish Navy. One of them, Captain Blom, is his father, who is a higher rank than him. And Johannes is with his crew.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's a sailor. Is he still a Navy man? I thought he was a sailor.
He might have been. He's a sailor.
He's a seaman.
He's a seaman.
But here's the thing. I just love it because when he ports on the dock, he sees a woman and he calls her name. And it's at night, and he's a very handsome guy. He's tall and handsome, and she calls out to her, and he asks what her name was, and she goes, "No, that's not my name." And he goes like, "Oh, I thought you were someone else." And she goes, "I really wish I was that person," and walks away. And he's wandering around this old town that he grew up in, and he runs into this old lady that he once knew and her daughter, and he gets invited for coffee, and they're asking questions and how he's been, and he's like, "Yeah, I've mostly just come to find this girl, which her name escapes me," but he finds her, and that's when he starts explaining his very, very
interesting backstory.
Yeah, basically his growing up. And
this lady he's talking to, his name is Sally. And Sally, let's just talk about the story a little bit. So his backstory is backstory because he's got a hunch on his back, so he's like a humpback. And so this anomaly on his own physical self made his father resent him quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so his father was very abusive to him growing up. And so that relationship, you can tell based on a lot of the flashbacks, when he was kind of just starting out, Johannes was starting out, you see a lot of that resentment turn into hatred, and he wanted nothing to do with his father.
Yeah, I think they're trying to salvage. They're salvagers on a ship, and you get introduced to the entire family. And then you find out that Johannes, his father, is basically a drunk now. Mm-hmm. He's very much in debt. And he always goes to basically like a showgirls show and falls in love. Well, obviously he has a mistress.
And that mistress is Sally.
Yep.
And that's the messed up part of it, because you have Johannes who wants to be with Sally, and they obviously have something going on.
And Sally's more close to age to Johannes.
Yes, exactly. Kind of just like, Midnight Smiles of a Summer Night. Okay. We were talking about, had a couple drinks in between all this. No. But you see that dichotomy of having this relationship of one who's a little bit older and one that's definitely a lot younger and has another love interest that's probably closer to the age and is actually probably the right match. But this movie is actually, I feel like, very deeply personal for Bergman.
Yeah.
Because of the father figure.
Yes, it does. And it definitely sets a theme for most of his movies. It's a family dynamic study. It really is. The mom, your heart's out for her. She has to deal with her husband. But she's a very strong-willed woman who's determined to keep her son away from turning into him and providing for him to have a better way out of the family, basically. But yeah, Johannes' dad comes and brings the mistress with him, and she's gonna start living with them like it's nothing. And Johannes is just deeply upset with that because he's been promised by his father that he'll be able to go to town, sign up for the Navy, and get out. But his dad wants none of that. His dad just wants to get drunk, be with his mistress, have his son salvage the stuff. Yep, that's really what it is.
And like we were saying, this personal thing of the strong female lead, or not lead, but like mother figure.
Yes.
It permeates with a lot of the things that Bergman does. You'll see future on down the road as well. And harsh father figures are also another thing that he happens to have in this particular film and several other films as well. But this one is very obvious, though, compared to a lot of the other films that we'll watch later on, because apparently, and I don't really know too much about Ingmar Bergman's childhood. I haven't read much on it, but I do know that there was kind of an abusive father in a way.
It seems a little too
very close to home.
Yeah, it feels like he's not really writing a character, but it feels like he's writing of an experience.
Yes, and so this one feels a little bit personal, and I know Bergman, like we were saying near the beginning of this, really doesn't want anything to do with this movie because, like I said, it was just a mess of a film to make and a mess of a film to show.
And I don't think it was even very much watched either.
No, it wasn't commercially successful at all. And this is, like I said, I think his second or third film. I want to say it's his third. And so this is definitely a film that wasn't particularly well received, but I think both of us enjoyed it for different aspects.
I really did. What it reminded me of, kind of in a way, is kind of like the American 40s films with Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah.
Like some of the more intense scenes, almost like a Key Largo. If you've seen that, kind of reminds me of that in a way, just how the way the characters interact. But what I really enjoyed about it is the family dynamic study. It really shows how the family interacts. Even though they're maybe not the perfect family, it shows the trinkets of how families work, at least for him. And it's just a universal truth, and not families that always get along. And Bergman really nails that, and it feels very sincere. It doesn't feel like how it's supposed to be Hollywood. It doesn't feel like a Hollywood movie. It feels like a very personal movie that he made, and he's somewhat embarrassed because, one, it got tarnished, and two, it didn't do as well as he wanted. So, of course, he would probably not want to acknowledge it very well.
Yeah.
But there's fine acting in it.
There's some great flashes of acting in that film, for sure.
And it has very great moments, especially near the end. I think
Yeah.
One of the final showdowns
is pretty intense.
But it's so engaging. You're just drawn to it because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's a 1947 film.
Yes.
And it feels like it's a little ahead of its time in that subject matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that we've been echoing a lot with each of one of these films that we talked about is that family dynamic. And that's, I think, what's the biggest thing thematically for the opening night we'll see. Especially we have 6 more films to talk about in opening night alone, and each one of those films has something to do with a relationship, and on varying degrees of mothers and fathers, spouses, boyfriend, girlfriends, young love, all those things we're gonna get to and more. But I think this is a really good introduction to Bergman. Because we have something from a really high caliber something of Smiles of a Summer Night to his first couple of films in Crisis and A Ship to India, and you can see flashes of brilliance in all of these films to where we're gonna explore a lot more to this.
Yeah, and again, A Ship to India is on a single disc, double packed with Crisis. I think that's a good double. You get his early stuff right away, and they're what I love about a lot of Bergman films, especially his early stuff, they're 90-minute films. I think one of them is an 87-minute film, so you can get through it's short and sweet and gets you, and that's what I really enjoy about it. And A Ship to India, again, I think you agree with me, is for the Bergman cinephile. It really isn't it's not a must watch.
You don't have to see it, but it's definitely for somebody who wants to know Bergman and where he's kind of started coming from and see, that transition from, near the beginning to the masterworks that he's done. Those are the films to kind of just explore and study.
But honestly, I think it's one of my favorites so far. I did really enjoy it. I think it's a movie, if you have the money and time, just go and do it. Go watch it. I don't think it's a bad movie.
So, I think that concludes our first opening night. This has been Act 1, where we talked about Smiles of a Summer Night, Crisis, and A Ship to India. Chris, do you want to say thanks to everyone?
Yeah, thanks for watching this. Him and I have been butting heads on how we're going to tackle this because we really just want to do it. I know on my channel I said every Monday I was going to do an update on it, and now that we're going to do this, I think I might just cancel it and put on a different slot on that.
We'll figure something out, but definitely check out Chris's channel down below. It's a wonderful channel. He's just starting, so he got a lot of different cool ideas kind of running, and I really like his last video he put up. And so it talks about a really underrated film from 2018 that I think you should check out, Blind Spotting.
Yeah. But how's your Swedish? Is it good after watching a few
My Swedish is, I picked up a few words, I'm sure, but I really don't know much. But thank you very much for watching our first part of this. We'll see you next time for Wild Strawberries and Company.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one.
It's going to be a good one.
We have it right here.
It's over there too. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Like this video, comment down below, share this video, hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time. I'm not Jones and around.
I love saying that.